Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack and this is an Alfa 33 Green Cloverleaf Veloce. Now the 33 had the dubious honour of being considered worse than the car that it replaced, the AlfaSud. Now it was better in some ways, definitely. It was more aerodynamic, had a bigger boot, it was more comfortable, but crucially it was retrograde in a few key areas. The Sud had inboard discs at the front, it had discs at the back. This actually had outboard discs at the front, so you don't get the advantage of having the lower unsprung weight. And it even went back to drums at the back. Also, it was 55 kilograms heavier than the Sud. And the cooking versions of the 33 came, for some bizarre reason, without a front anti-roll bar. The first ones did. So that nice taut handling that you got with the Sud, you didn't actually get with these. Now Alfa were always known for the more sporting versions of their family saloons, and when the 33 came out, that was even more of a problem because the halo model at that point was called the Gold Cloverleaf. Now it was supposed to be more of a luxury car, I suppose, than an out-and-out performance version of the 33, but all the same, that was the peak that you could get, and it came with an 85 horsepower version of the 1.5 single carb, so vastly underpowered. It was also quite expensive. At £6,700, it was pricier than the quicker XR3i and just a little bit below the far superior Golf GTI. Also, what did you get for your money on top of the standard cars? Well, you got a plastic wood steering wheel and gear change and gear knob. You got a passenger side rear view mirror, fabric covered door cards, and lastly, most importantly of all, you got the new spanking Alfa control system, which was supposed to tell you everything that was going wrong with the car. What actually ended up happening most of the time is that the system itself continuously went wrong and told you things about the car which weren't actually at fault. A year after the original release, in '84, the Green Cloverleaf came out, and that was a little bit more of a serious attempt at a performance car. That had a 105 horsepower version of the 1.5 litre, but really, although the chassis was a little bit stiffened up and so on, it was still underpowered for the new weight of the 33. In 1988, there was a mild update and refresh. Externally, it was only the indicators to clear indicators and so on, but also, importantly, the engine was upgraded significantly. It went from 1.5 to 1.7, and it had hydraulic tappets for the first time. So that was lower maintenance, more performance, and it put out a much more credible 118 horsepower. This is the car that we have here. And I think this might be the 33 that will redeem Alfa. We'll take it out, see how it drives. Before that, I just want to tell you one really interesting, quirky fact about the 33 that I wasn't aware of until quite recently, and that is that 10 years before the Toyota Yaris, they made a prototype hybrid of one of these, which is really quite incredible. It was used on the Giardinetta platform, which is basically the estate version of this, and the boxer engine that these came with, which they inherited from the Sud, is placed so low in the engine bay that it's actually perfect for a hybrid because you can just slot the electric engine right on top of it. Ultimately, they were only using NiCad batteries at the time, so it was never going to be a very serious proposition, but really interesting to note that they did that. Right, let's take it out and see how it goes. Well, that does sound pretty fruity, and to be honest, that is because he does have an aftermarket exhaust on it. He's also got, instead of an airbox, he's got some sort of foam filters on there. All in all, it's a pretty standard car. Not many of these survive, to be honest, without any mods having been made to them. One of the things that immediately strikes you is it's just got that typical Alfa gear change, so the car feels innately sporty straight away. The way the engine sounds, the driving position, and you kind of get in it, and it's really responsive engine as well, and then you change gear and it feels like you're in a truck. It's so bizarre. The Alfa gear change just doesn't make any sense to me, and it's not just with this car either. They're all like that. The transaxles tend to have a horrible gear change because there's such a long linkage to the back. This doesn't have that excuse. Now, it is similar in the SUDs and the Sprints that came before. This feels slightly less precise, only a little bit, but it could just be bushings or whatever. I know that Liam, who owns this car, has done loads and loads of work to it. It's got an incredible 34,000 miles that are backed up by the documentation. Although perhaps it's been through some hard times at some point because some of the things like the seats are a little bit worn. I don't know what's happened to it, but it looks very, very nice in the flesh. Now, the early versions of the 33 had a moving, it was one of the things that it made a huge fuss about, is that the instruments moved up and down with the wheel when you adjusted it. So pretty useless really, like that Alfa control system that gave you loads of fake warnings about things being wrong. For these facelifted versions, those no longer move. They improved the interior a little bit, I think made some of the controls less fragile feeling, and overall, as an interior, I think from the 80s, it's not that bad. There's a few little creaks and rattles on there, but ergonomically for an Alfa as well, it's way better than the SUD that had this bizarre, the switch for the heating fan was on the stalk, but the controls were down there. So this has been rationalized and made a little bit more standard, shall we say. Now let's see what that 1.7 flat 4 is capable of. This is still the 8 valve. Throttle response is excellent. Much better than the Sprint that I drove a couple of months ago, which had the single carb. It really feels like it's woken up the flat 4. In terms of power, it still doesn't feel that quick, to be quite honest. Don't pull out, thank you. It still doesn't feel that quick, to be honest, but with the lovely sound of the flat 4 in there, I think it makes up for the lack of outright pace, and also just how keen it is in the mid-range. Flipping down is just lovely. The wheel as well is very heavily canted forward, which is always quite odd, but I found, like in the Mini that I drove the other day, in a way, and I know this might sound ridiculous, but when you have the steering wheel facing you, which is the ideal position, just at a flat angle like that, when you have a little bit more horizontal, when you're turning into the corner, it almost feels more natural, like the car is following your hand movement, if you see what I mean. So I don't mind this too much. My legs are quite bunched up, but there's enough room there for me to sort of move them around. The pedals, fairly straight, they're not really that offset, they're quite close together, pretty easy for heel and towing. It feels like a really good little car. It's just pretty well tied in, at least at sort of medium brisk speeds. The chassis feels pretty good, the ride isn't too bad, body control is pretty good. The steering amuses me a little bit, because in some ways I really, really love it. It's very responsive, it gives you a lot of feel. But sometimes you chuck it into the corner and it feels like it wants to push on a little bit. Actually, it's pretty good. I don't know what it is, on some of the longer sweepers, it just, there seems to be a difference with the rate at which it wants to turn. But anyway, chuck it into a corner pretty hard, a tight corner like that, and it really did grip. Now, this does have some aftermarket wheels, so I assume that they are bigger tyres. They are Alfa wheels, but they're a bit wider. But all the same, it seems to handle pretty well. Let's do another little pull now. Just enjoy that engine. Yeah, and first you can go up to 6, afterwards sort of changing up at 5.5. Brakes don't feel spectacular, but I do love the way it turns. It's a lot of fun, it really is. Bit mushy at the top of the pedal, the brakes, but afterwards they do work pretty well. That was great, that really is great. You get to the edge of grip, doesn't seem to be any understeer, and it starts to sort of quite progressively go out sideways, both sides drifting a little bit. It's not a big engine and it's not a massive amount of power, but by the standards of the time, it was pretty quick. It's quite linear in its power delivery. There isn't much below 3,000. After that, it picks up a little bit, but it is ultra responsive, which makes it an awful lot of fun. In many ways, it reminds me a bit of my old Integrale 16 valve, because it's got the same sort of live feeling on the road, and when you get to the sort of close to the limit as well, it starts to drift, but it's sort of front and back. It's pretty neutral. You know, ultimately, would you say that this was as good as a Golf or an XR3i? Well, I'm pretty sure that this particular version of the 33 would definitely have outhandled an XR3i. An XR3i would have been better built, not amazing, but better built. And the Golf, I think, would still, in most ways, wouldn't be as exciting as this, but it would have been an easier car to live with, much better built, better residuals, all that kind of stuff. All throughout this test, I've been looking for a way to properly describe the 33 Cloverleaf, and I've been struggling. I've actually been back in my 306, and often when I do a road test, I get back in that and it sets a benchmark, because that is a really, really good car. And both with the Sprint that I did a few months ago and with this car, I got back in my 306 and I thought, oh, everything feels masked. So that is a great car with great steering, great gauge, all the rest of it, but it just didn't feel, and the word I was looking for was as immediate as this. The way the throttle is judged is just perfect. It's immediately responsive. The whole car gives you so much feedback. It's responsive to turning. There's no filter. Yeah, so it's absolutely unclouded by anything. You are at one with this car. So although in some ways maybe the interior feels a little bit cheap, in terms of driver feedback, what it gives you, how it responds to commands, it's on a very, very high level. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have a car that you want me to do a review on, I've been looking for an SZ for absolutely ages, but some of the 70s Alfas as well, unless I've already done them. Please do get in touch. If you want to see something, a car that's similar to this but has a little bit more delicacy, have a look at my Sprint video, and it gives you a little bit more of the history and the technical data of the chassis that this was using as well. Thank you so much, and see you soon.